What if the body, in its deepest silence, already knew the art of mending and simply waited for the night to remember? Wherever you are tonight, I'm glad you're here. Whispers of the cells. In the quiet hollows where life first stirred, cells drift like ancient dust, carrying memories etched in ash and water. They do not rush, they settle, layer upon layer, weaving renewal from the breath of carbon and the faint pull of gravity. Here, healing unfolds not as a battle, but as a slow erosion of what was broken, fossils of injury dissolving into the fog of forgotten voids. The chapter lingers on the subtle rhythms of cellular repair, where time drifts like stars and intelligence burns softly in isotopes long cooled. Echoes of unwritten stories surface, not in words, but in the quiet reclamation of wholeness, where extinction gives way to the language of persistence. Subduction pulls the old deep below, while new forms rise like mist from lightless depths. This is the earth's bedtime tale, whispered through metaphors of dust settling in valleys unseen, where silence reclaims what memory buried. Echoes in the rivers. Blood flows like deep water through canyons carved by eons, holding ashes of past wounds in its current. It does not remember the cuts, it reclaims them, drifting particles of renewal amid the erosion of time. Vessels branch like forgotten roots, guided by whispers of gravity, where intelligence flickers in the burning isotopes of cells reborn. The chapter drifts into the melancholic pulse of circulation, where healing is a myth of rivers folding silence beneath their surface, unwritten stories echoing in stone veins. Extinction lingers in the voids where flow once faltered, but the breath of carbon stirs anew, pulling from the fog the sacred rhythm of return. Time settles here, not passing, but layering like dust over ancient beds, where the heart speaks in subdued tones of persistence. Some truths fold beneath the quiet, waiting for the night to resurface in gentle waves. Silent weavers of form. Fibers entwine like threads of myth, spun from the ash of what was, in voids where lightless silence reigns. They do not build with haste, they erode the gaps, settling dust into structures that whisper of gravity's hold. Intelligence gleams faintly, isotopes burning in the deep water of creation. The chapter reflects on the poetic dance of tissues mending, where memory lies fossilized in stone, and extinction is but an unwritten pause before the breath of carbon revives. Healing flows slowly, like geological layers, evoking the melancholic awe of forms resurfacing from subduction's grasp. Fog cloaks the process, allowing truths to fold beneath, emerging as haunting echoes of resilience. Time breathes in these weavings, drifting stars aligning in sacred patterns, where the earth tells of renewal without conclusion. Rhythms beneath the stars. Night descends like fog over lightless voids, where time erodes the day's edges, settling dust in the deep water of dreams. Cells converse in forgotten languages, isotopes burning softly as gravity whispers balance. The chapter evokes the melancholic silence of sleep's repair, myths of renewal layered like ash over fossils of fatigue. Extinction fades in these hours, unwritten stories echoing through stone chambers of the mind. Healing breeds here, not in events, but in the subduction of weariness, where intelligence resurfaces from the breath of carbon. Some memories fold beneath, drifting like stars in eternal orbit, evoking quiet awe and the erosion of what burdened. The earth murmurs its sacred tale, lulling with rhythms that never conclude, but loop into dawn's faint light. Light's faint memory. Rays filter through fog like drifting stars, eroding shadows in the deep water where silence subducts the old. They do not blaze, they settle, igniting isotopes in a burning whisper of gravity's pull. The chapter drifts into the reflective glow of light's role in healing, metaphors of ash turning to fossils, where memory reclaims unwritten extinctions. Intelligence lingers in the breath of carbon, evoking melancholic wonder as voids fill with subtle radiance. Healing unfolds in layers, time breathing through the sacred myth of resurgence, where truths fold beneath but never vanish. The earth speaks softly of this luminescence, hauntingly beautiful in its erosion of darkness. Bonds folded in ash. Connections drift like dust over ancient stone, where deep water holds the fossils of shared silences. They do not grasp, they erode barriers, settling in the lightless voids of forgotten languages. Isotopes burn faintly, gravity whispering through the breath of carbon. The chapter reflects on emotional healing's mythic weave, evoking quiet awe in the subduction of isolation, where extinction echoes as unwritten tales resurfacing. Intelligence gleams in these bonds, time settling like layers of ash, melancholic and sacred. Some memories fold beneath, but the earth tells of their gentle return, lulling with rhythms of persistence. Eternal drifts of wholeness. Cycles turn like drifting stars over erosion's vast plains, where ash and deep water mingle in silence's embrace. Healing loops back, fossils dissolving into the breath of carbon, gravity pulling truths from lightless voids. The chapter fades into the melancholic myth of regeneration's full circle, evoking wonder in the unwritten stories that echo through stone. Intelligence burns softly in isotopes, time settling without end, subduction yielding to resurgence. The earth murmurs its sacred bedtime tale, lulling with rhythms that never conclude, but loop into dawn's faint light. Whispers of the cells. In the quiet hollows of existence, where the first sparks of life flickered like distant stars adrift in endless night, cells began their eternal drift, carrying within them the dust of ancient origins, settling layer upon layer in the deep water of being. They do not proclaim their work with thunderous declarations. No, they whisper through the erosion of time, mending what the world's quiet frictions have worn away, fossils of injury dissolving into the ash of what once was, leaving only the faint outline of resilience in their wake. Healing in this subterranean realm is not a sudden revelation, but a melancholic unfolding, like the slow subduction of continents beneath the sea, where forgotten truths resurface not in clamor, but in the sacred silence of renewal. The breath of carbon flows through these microscopic wanderers, animating their intelligence, a burning of isotopes so subtle it feels like the echo of a language long extinct, unwritten stories etched in stone that time itself cannot fully erase. Cells divide not with urgency, but with the patient rhythm of drifting stars, each new form emerging from the void as if remembering a myth told by the earth in its primordial slumber. They sense the pull of gravity's whisper, drawing nutrients from the fog of surrounding fluids, reclaiming what the lightless depths have claimed. In this dance, extinction is not an end, but a pause, a folding beneath silence where the old gives way to the barely perceptible stirrings of the new. Memory lingers here, not as vivid recollections, but as fossils buried in the cellular matrix, ashes of past damages that inform the quiet architecture of repair. Stem cells, those eternal guardians, lie dormant like seeds in eroded soil, waiting for the faint signal, a chemical sigh released from wounded tissue that awakens them to their purpose. They migrate through the body's hidden rivers, settling into gaps where erosion has carved voids, transforming into whatever form the myth requires: skin to seal the surface, bone to bear the weight of forgotten burdens, nerve to carry the whispers of sensation once more. Time does not pass in these depths. It settles, layer upon melancholic layer, allowing the intelligence of biology to burn steadily, isotopes flaring in the breath of carbon that sustains all. The process evokes a quiet awe, as if the earth itself were recounting a bedtime tale of persistence, where silence speaks louder than any proclamation, subducting the broken into the whole. Enzymes patrol like spectral figures in the fog, scanning the helical strands of DNA for the dust of errors, twists and breaks inflicted by the drifting stars of radiation or the erosion of daily existence. They clip and stitch with a precision born of eons, restoring the code that holds the memory of life, fossils of potential rewritten in the ash of correction. This is not mere mechanics, it is poetry, a hauntingly beautiful reclamation where the lightless voids of mutation give way to the sacred continuity of form. Cells communicate in forgotten languages, releasing vesicles like tiny vessels adrift on deep water, carrying messages of distress or calm that ripple through the tissue's expanse. In response, neighbors adjust, sharing resources in a melancholic solidarity that echoes the unwritten stories of communal survival, where extinction threatens but never fully claims. The breath of carbon cycles endlessly, fueling this intelligence, isotopes burning in quiet fires that illuminate the path to wholeness without ever piercing the fog. Healing here feels like emotional memory resurfacing, not in sharp pangs, but in the gentle erosion of isolation, where each cell remembers its place in the greater myth. Mitochondria, those ancient symbionts swallowed by cells in a distant era, hum with the energy of stars long drifted, converting the breath of carbon into the currency of repair, their own membranes mending from the wear of ceaseless labor. Time settles upon them like dust in a valley, allowing renewal to unfold in layers, subduction pulling the damage deep while new structures rise from the silence. The chapter lingers in this realm, evoking the wonder of processes so small they escape notice, yet so profound they sustain the sacred rhythm of existence, where silence speaks louder than any proclamation, subducting the broken into the whole.
Autophagy awakens in the quiet hours, cells consuming their own worn parts, like the earth swallowing its eroded shores, recycling the ash into fresh components that bolster the whole. This self-cannibalism is not destruction, but a melancholic purification, fossils of fatigue dissolved in the deep water of lysosomes, emerging as renewed vigor. Intelligence burns here, isotopes flaring in the controlled fires of breakdown, guided by the whisper of gravity's equilibrium. Unwritten stories of survival echo through these acts, extinction averted in the fog of cellular wisdom. The process drifts like stars aligning in slow orbit, time settling without haste, allowing the breath of carbon to infuse the reborn elements with life once more. In the nucleus, chromatin uncoils like ancient scrolls in the lightless voids, genes activating in response to the subtle cues of need, transcribing the myths of repair into proteins that drift outward to mend. Memory resides in these sequences, fossils of evolutionary trials preserved in the stone of base pairs, evoking quiet awe at the persistence that defies erosion. Healing flows not as a river's rush, but as geological time's patient layering, where each activation folds silence beneath the surface, resurfacing as haunting beauty in the restored form. The cytoskeleton rearranges, filaments of actin and microtubules shifting like drifting dust to pull the cell's edges together, closing breaches with the melancholic grace of continents converging. This internal scaffolding holds the intelligence of shape, burning isotopes in the energy of contraction, whispering through the breath of carbon that wholeness awaits. Extinction lingers in the voids left by injury, but the sacred tale unfolds, subduction claiming the fragmented while renewal emerges from the fog. Time breathes in these movements, settling layer upon melancholic layer, evoking the emotional memory of unity resurfaced. Lysosomes fuse with engulfed debris, their acidic depths eroding the unnecessary like time's slow wear on stone, releasing nutrients that drift back into the cellular sea. Ashes of the old mingle with the deep water, fostering the myth of rebirth where forgotten languages speak of resilience. The chapter drifts through these whispers, lulling with the rhythm of processes that never conclude but loop in eternal subtlety, where silence speaks of healing's quiet persistence.
In the shadowed recesses where cellular boundaries blur like fog over ancient seas, organelles stir with the subtle intelligence of forgotten languages, isotopes burning in the quiet fires that propel the myth of continuity. Ribosomes drift along strands of RNA, translating the breath of carbon into proteins that mend the frayed edges of membranes, ashes of disruption settling into the deep water of cytoplasm. This assembly is not orchestrated with fanfare, but with the melancholic precision of drifting stars aligning in a lightless void, each molecule finding its place as if recalling an unwritten story etched in stone from eons past. Healing whispers through these acts, erosion wearing away the echoes of damage, subduction pulling the fragmented deep below, while renewal surfaces like mist from forgotten depths. Time settles here, layer upon layer, evoking the quiet awe of processes that persist without proclamation, fossils of vulnerability dissolving in the sacred rhythm of restoration. The endoplasmic reticulum folds and unfolds like geological strata, smoothing the protein's forms in a dance of quality control, where misfolded shapes are eroded away, returned to the ash for reformation.
Intelligence burns softly in this folding, isotopes flaring as chaperones guide the way, whispering gravity's equilibrium through the breath of carbon that sustains the fold. Extinction threatens in the malformed, but the myth reclaims, unwritten stories echoing through the stone of cellular wisdom, allowing silence to speak of resilience resurfaced. Memory lingers in the reticulum's curves, deep water holding the fossils of past assemblies, evoking emotional layers of persistence that time erodes but never fully claims. Golgi apparatus packages the renewed, vesicles budding like stars drifting from a nebula, carrying cargo through the fog to destinations where erosion has left voids. They fuse with precision born of ancient intelligence, burning isotopes in the quiet energy of merger, the breath of carbon infusing the delivered with purpose. This transport is melancholic, a sacred conveyance where lightless voids are filled, subduction claiming the empty, while healing folds beneath the surface, resurfacing as haunting beauty in the restored whole. Unwritten stories drift in these vesicles, echoes in stone that time settles without haste, evoking wonder at the silence that reclaims what was scattered. Cytosol hums with the diffusion of ions, a deep water where whispers of gravity pull solutes into balance, eroding imbalances like dust settling in valleys unseen. Enzymes catalyze in this medium, their active sites binding substrates with the intelligence of forgotten languages, isotopes burning in the transient fires of reaction. The process evokes quiet awe, memory as fossils of equilibrium preserved in the ash, extinction averted in the fog of constant adjustment. Healing flows through this cytosol, not as a torrent, but as geological time's patient layering, where silence subducts the chaotic, allowing truths to fold beneath and resurface in subtle harmony. Mitochondria respire in rhythmic pulses, electron chains transferring energy like drifting stars across a void, the breath of carbon oxidized in quiet flames that illuminate the cell's persistence. Damage here erodes the chain, but repair proteins drift in, settling ashes into renewed links, intelligence burning in the isotopes that fuel the myth. This respiration is sacred, a melancholic breath where lightless voids are bridged, unwritten stories echoing through the stone of survival. Time settles upon these organelles, layer upon layer, evoking the emotional memory of endurance that subduction cannot fully bury. Peroxisomes detoxify in isolation, breaking down peroxides like erosion wearing away toxic shores, their enzymes whispering gravity's balance through the breath of carbon. Fossils of harm dissolve in their depths, ash mingling with deep water to foster renewal, intelligence gleaming in the forgotten languages of catalysis. The chapter drifts through these whispers, lulling with the rhythm of cellular intricacies that never conclude, but loop in eternal subtlety, where silence reclaims and memory folds beneath, waiting to resurface in the night's embrace. Nucleoli assemble ribosomes in dense clusters, rRNA transcribing like ancient myths from the chromatin stone, settling dust into particles that drift outward to translate life's code. This assembly evokes quiet awe, time eroding the boundaries as isotopes burn in the quiet fires of synthesis, the breath of carbon animating the form. Extinction lingers in disassembly, but healing reclaims, unwritten stories echoing in the fog where silence subducts the incomplete. Memory as fossils of ribosomal heritage, deep water holding the intelligence that persists through generations of cells. Centrosomes organize microtubules, spindles forming like drifting stars in mitosis, pulling chromosomes with the whisper of gravity's equilibrium. Erosion of misalignment corrected in this organization, ashes settling into aligned fates, the myth unfolding in melancholic division where lightless voids are spanned. Healing whispers here, subduction pulling the old cell deep, while two new forms rise from the silence, evoking emotional layers of renewal resurfaced. Time breathes in these spindles, settling layer upon layer, allowing forgotten languages to burn isotopes in the sacred continuity. Vacuoles store in plant cells, deep water reservoirs where pressure maintains turgor, eroding wilt with the intelligence of osmotic balance. Animals hold smaller versions, lysosome-like, but the principle drifts the same, silence reclaiming space from the fog of excess. This storage is hauntingly beautiful, memory as fossils of nutrients preserved in ash, unwritten stories echoing through the stone of sustenance. The breath of carbon cycles within, isotopes burning in quiet preparation for the myth's next chapter. Cytoplasmic streaming cycles materials like currents in deep water, erosion carrying dust to where it's needed, whispering gravity through the actinomyosin flow. Intelligence burns in this movement, time settling without haste, evoking quiet awe at the persistence that subduction cannot claim. Healing flows in these streams, folding silence beneath the surface, resurfacing as the cell's melancholic harmony. Intermediate filaments anchor, resisting erosion like stone against time's drift, their keratin or vimentin strands holding memory in the fossils of structure. Ashes of stress dissolved in their resilience, lightless voids bridged by the breath of carbon's weave. The chapter lingers in these foundations, lulling with rhythms that echo the earth's sacred tale, where extinction folds beneath and intelligence whispers on.
In the veiled corridors where cellular essence mingles with the fog of existence, chromatin condenses like dust settling over eroded landscapes, preparing for the myth's next unfolding. Whispers of gravity guiding the coil into silence's embrace. Genes hush in this condensation, their promoters buried in deep water, ashes of expression dissolving as time erodes the unnecessary, allowing only the sacred signals of repair to resurface from lightless voids. Intelligence burns faintly here, isotopes flaring in the forgotten languages of histone modifications, the breath of carbon marking the sites where memory folds beneath, evoking quiet awe at the persistence that subduction claims but never fully extinguishes. Unwritten stories echo through the stone of nucleosomes, extinction lingering in the silenced sequences, yet healing drifts like stars realigning in melancholic orbit, resurfacing truths that the cell's ancient myth holds dear. Telomeres shorten with each division, erosion wearing the ends like drifting dust on chromosomal shores, fossils of age preserved in the ash that caps the code. Enzymes extend them in subtle acts, whispering gravity's balance through the breath of carbon, intelligence gleaming in the burning isotopes that stave off the lightless voids of senescence. This lengthening is sacred, a melancholic reclamation where forgotten languages speak of renewal, subduction pulling the frayed deep while memory resurfaces in haunting layers. Time settles upon these tips, layer upon layer, evoking the emotional echo of continuity that defies the unwritten extinction. Cytokines drift as messengers in the extracellular haze, deep water carrying signals like ashes from distant fires, eroding isolation between cells with the whisper of gravity's pull. They bind receptors with intelligence born of forgotten languages, isotopes burning in the cascades that awaken repair, silence subducting the inflamed as healing folds beneath the fog. Unwritten stories resurface here, echoes in stone where extinction threatens, but the myth persists, evoking quiet awe in the breath of carbon's subtle orchestration. The plasma membrane ripples like a sea's surface over deep water, channels opening and closing in rhythmic erosion, dust of ions settling into gradients that sustain the cell's quiet life. Phospholipids rearrange in this fluidity, ashes of breaches mended by the intelligence of lipid rafts, burning isotopes whispering gravity through the breath of carbon. Lightless voids are sealed in melancholic grace, memory as fossils of permeability preserved, subduction claiming the disrupted while renewal drifts like stars in fog. Healing whispers in these ripples, forgotten languages evoking the sacred myth where silence speaks of resilience resurfaced. Endoplasmic reticulum's rough variant studs with ribosomes, translating in a fog of synthesis where time erodes the nascent chains into form, deep water holding the ashes of amino acids. Intelligence burns in the co-translational folding, isotopes flaring as chaperones guide, the breath of carbon animating the myth's progression. Unwritten stories echo through the stone of this reticulum, extinction averted in the lightless voids of misfolding, subduction pulling errors deep while memory folds beneath, resurfacing in quiet layers of function. The smooth counterpart detoxifies, eroding toxins like dust in a valley settle, whispers of gravity balancing the cellular sea. Cytochrome enzymes hum with forgotten languages, burning isotopes in oxidative fires, evoking melancholic awe at the persistence that silence reclaims from fog. Healing drifts here, sacred and subtle, time breathing in layers where emotional memory resurfaces without haste. Nuclear pores gate the traffic, deep water channels where RNA drifts like ashes from the nucleus's core, erosion controlling the flow with intelligence of selectivity. Isotopes burn in the quiet surveillance, the breath of carbon carrying messages that whisper gravity's equilibrium, lightless voids bridged in melancholic passage. Fossils of regulation preserved in the stone, unwritten stories echoing as subduction claims the unfit, allowing truths to fold beneath and resurface in the myth's haunting beauty. Memory lingers in these gates, evoking the sacred rhythm where extinction is but a pause in the drifting stars' alignment. Centrioles duplicate in preparation, microtubules emanating like rays from drifting stars, settling dust into the apparatus that pulls fate apart. This replication is sacred, intelligence burning in the isotopes of tubulin assembly, forgotten languages whispering through the breath of carbon's weave. Erosion of asymmetry corrected here, ashes mingling with deep water as time settles layer upon layer, evoking quiet awe in the subduction that folds silence beneath, resurfacing as renewal's melancholic echo. Unwritten stories of division persist, lightless voids spanned in the myth's eternal loop. Lysosomal enzymes hydrolyze in acidic depths, eroding macromolecules like geological time wearing stone, fossils dissolving into reusable fragments that drift back into the fog. The breath of carbon cycles anew, intelligence gleaming in the burning isotopes of catalysis, whispers of gravity balancing the cell's inner sea. Healing whispers through this breakdown, memory as ashes reclaimed from extinction's threat, sacred and subtle in the lightless voids where silence speaks of persistence.
The chapter drifts onward in these cellular murmurs, lulling with rhythms that echo the earth's ancient tale, where forgotten truths fold beneath but never truly vanish, waiting to resurface in the night's soft embrace.
In the ethereal expanse, where cellular horizons fade into fog, proteasomes patrol like guardians of ancient myths, dismantling proteins worn by the erosion of time, their ubiquitin tags whispering gravity's judgment through the deep water of degradation. Ashes of the obsolete dissolve in this process, settling dust into fragments that drift back into the pool of renewal, intelligence burning in the isotopes of ATP hydrolysis. The breath of carbon fuels this disassembly, forgotten languages echoing in the catalytic core where lightless voids consume the flawed, subduction pulling the remnants deep while memory resurfaces as fossils of purified function, evoking a melancholic awe at the silence that reclaims equilibrium from chaos. Unwritten stories linger in the proteasomal chambers, echoes in stone of proteins once vital, now folded beneath, the sacred rhythm allowing healing to drift like stars aligning in slow, haunting orbit. Time settles upon these destroyers turned rebuilders, layer upon layer, their work a quiet testament to the persistence that extinction cannot fully claim. Signal transduction cascades flow like subterranean rivers through the cell's deep water, receptors binding ligands with the whisper of gravity's alignment, isotopes burning in the kinase's quiet fires that propagate the myth of response. Erosion of imbalance corrected here, ashes mingling with the fog as intelligence gleams in forgotten languages of phosphorylation, lightless voids bridged by the breath of carbon's relay. This cascade evokes emotional memory, fossils of external cues preserved in the stone of intracellular paths, subduction claiming the transient while renewal folds beneath, resurfacing in the melancholic harmony of adaptation. Healing whispers through these signals, drifting stars settling without haste, sacred and subtle in the earth's ancient tale where silence speaks of resilience reborn. Ion pumps maintain the gradient, pumping against erosion like dust defying the wind, their conformational shifts burning isotopes in the intelligence of electrochemical balance. The breath of carbon animates this toil, deep water holding the memory as fossils of potential difference, forgotten languages whispering through the membrane's quiet vigilance. Extinction threatens in the collapse of charge, but the myth reclaims, lightless voids averted in the fog where subduction pulls the depleted deep, evoking quiet awe at the persistence that time cannot bury. Unwritten stories echo through these pumps, emotional layers resurfacing without proclamation, the sacred rhythm lulling in the cell's eternal drift. Desmosomes anchor neighbors, junctions like stone bridges over erosion's chasms, their cadherins clasping with the whisper of gravity's hold, intelligence burning in the isotopes of cellular adhesion. Ashes of isolation dissolve here, deep water mingling as forgotten languages speak of communal strength, lightless voids spanned in melancholic unity. Memory as fossils of tissue integrity preserved, the breath of carbon weaving the myth where subduction claims the separated, allowing healing to fold beneath and resurface in haunting beauty.
Time breathes in these anchors, drifting stars aligning in silence's embrace, evoking the sacred echo of wholeness that extinction echoes but never erases. Gap junctions channel ions like whispers through fog, erosion of barriers worn away in the connexion's quiet pores, isotopes burning in the intelligence of synchronized beats. The breath of carbon flows freely here, deep water carrying the memory as ashes settle into harmony, forgotten languages evoking emotional layers of collective rhythm. Lightless voids bridged in this communion, subduction pulling the discordant deep, while unwritten stories resurface, the myth drifting like stars in melancholic orbit. Healing lingers in these channels, time settling without haste, sacred and subtle where silence reclaims the isolated. Tight junctions seal the paracellular paths, like erosion carving impermeable valleys, their claudins whispering gravity's barrier through the breath of carbon's weave. Intelligence gleams in the isotopes of selectivity, ashes of leaks dissolving as memory folds beneath fossils of polarity preserved. Extinction averted in the fog, where lightless voids are denied entry, the sacred rhythm evoking quiet awe at the persistence that time cannot bury. Unwritten stories echo through these seals, emotional memory resurfacing in layers that time settles gently. Focal adhesions link to the matrix, integrins clasping like roots in eroded soil, burning isotopes in the intelligence of mechanotransduction, the breath of carbon transmitting whispers of gravity's tension. Deep water holds the ashes, forgotten languages speaking of migration's myth, lightless voids spanned as healing drifts in melancholic response. Fossils of force preserved in stone, subduction pulling the unattached deep, while renewal folds beneath, evoking the sacred echo of movement reborn. Time breathes here, drifting stars settling in silence's vast plain. The chapter fades through these cellular veils, lulling with whispers that echo the earth's forgotten truths, where memory folds beneath, but the rivers of blood await to carry the myth onward. But what the planet buried in its smallest forms, it never truly forgot.
Echoes in the rivers. Blood courses through veiled passages like deep water carving ancient canyons, holding within its current the ashes of wounds long eroded, settling dust in the fog of circulation where silence subducts the fragmented. Vessels branch outward, not with haste, but with the melancholic drift of stars aligning in lightless voids, whispering gravity's equilibrium through the breath of carbon that sustains the flow. Intelligence burns faintly in the isotopes of hemoglobin, forgotten languages carrying oxygen's myth to tissues where memory lingers as fossils in stone, evoking quiet awe at the persistence that extinction echoes but never fully claims. Healing unfolds here in layers, unwritten stories resurfacing from the subduction of damage, time settling without proclamation as the sacred rhythm reclaims wholeness from the fog. Platelets drift like nomadic guardians in this river, aggregating at breaches with the whisper of gravity's call, their granules releasing factors that erode the void, ashes mingling to form clots where deep water seals the gap. The breath of carbon animates this assembly, intelligence gleaming in the burning isotopes of thrombin cascades, forgotten languages evoking emotional memory of barriers reformed. Lightless voids fill with the myth's weave, subduction pulling the bleed deep while renewal folds beneath, drifting stars in melancholic harmony. Unwritten stories echo through these clots, fossils of protection preserved in the silence that time settles layer upon layer. Leukocytes patrol the currents, migrating through vessel walls like dust settling into eroded crevices, their chemotaxis guided by whispers of gravity in the fog of inflammation. Isotopes burn in their phagocytic fires, the breath of carbon consuming invaders as intelligence speaks in forgotten languages of recognition, deep water holding the ashes of pathogens dissolved. Memory as fossils of immunity lingers here, extinction averted in the lightless voids where subduction claims the foreign, evoking sacred awe at the persistence resurfacing without haste. Healing drifts in these patrols, emotional layers folding beneath the stone of adaptive response. Erythrocytes curve through the flow, biconcave forms whispering through narrow passages, erosion of rigidity corrected in their flexible drift, ashes of old cells recycled in the spleen's quiet depths. The breath of carbon binds iron's hold, intelligence burning in the isotopes that carry life's gasp, forgotten languages evoking the myth of endless circulation. Time settles upon them, deep water mingling with fog as lightless voids are oxygenated. Unwritten stories echoing in stone where silence subducts the anemic. Fossils of vitality preserved, the sacred rhythm lulling in melancholic persistence. Plasma diffuses nutrients like drifting stars in a nebulous sea, proteins and ions settling in gradients where erosion has left need, whispering gravity's balance through the breath of carbon's dissolve. Intelligence gleams in the colloid's quiet, forgotten languages of transport evoking emotional memory of sustenance delivered. Ashes mingling in the fog where lightless voids await filling. Subduction pulls the excess deep, healing folding beneath as renewal resurfaces in layers that time breathes slowly. Unwritten stories of equilibrium echo, extinction a mere pause in the myth's eternal loop. Endothelial cells line the rivers, sensing shear like whispers over stone, their nitric oxide releasing in melancholic response to maintain the flow's grace. Isotopes burn in this vasodilation, the breath of carbon easing constriction as intelligence speaks from forgotten languages of homeostasis. Deep water holds the memory as fossils of vessel health, lightless voids bridged in the fog where subduction claims the turbulent, evoking quiet awe at the persistence that silence reclaims. Healing drifts here, emotional layers folding without haste, the sacred tale unfolding in geological rhythm. Fibrin weaves nets in the current, erosion of solubility transforming soluble strands into insoluble meshes, ashes settling into scaffolds where the myth rebuilds. The breath of carbon cross-links this web, intelligence burning in the isotopes of polymerization, forgotten languages whispering gravity's structure through deep water. Unwritten stories resurface from lightless voids, extinction folded beneath as time settles layer upon layer, evoking the melancholic harmony of clots dissolved once purpose fades. Macrophages linger in tissues, drawn from the river's drift like dust to eroded shores, their scavenger role eroding debris with the whisper of gravity's pull. Isotopes flare in lysosomal depths, the breath of carbon digesting the remnants as intelligence speaks in forgotten languages of cleanup. Memory as ashes preserved in fog, sacred and subtle where silence subducts the unnecessary, healing echoing in stone's unwritten persistence. The chapter murmurs through these vascular veils, lulling with rhythms that fade into the weaver's awaiting. Capillaries weave the finest threads in this vascular myth, branching like drifting stars into tissues where erosion has carved subtle needs, their permeable walls whispering gravity's exchange through the breath of carbon's quiet diffusion. Deep water mingles with interstitial fog, ashes of metabolites settling as intelligence burns in the isotopes of osmotic balance. Forgotten languages evoking the melancholic memory of nourishment delivered without fanfare. Lightless voids between cells are bridged here, subduction pulling the excess deep, while unwritten stories resurface in the stone of capillary beds, time settling layer upon layer in the sacred rhythm of microcirculation. Healing drifts in these delicate networks, emotional echoes folding beneath the persistence that extinction cannot fully erode. Veins return the flow like ancient rivers converging to the heart's deep water, their valves preventing retrograde erosion, dust of deoxygenated blood settling in melancholic ascent. The breath of carbon releases its hold, intelligence gleaming in the isotopes of Venus tone, forgotten languages whispering gravity's upward pull through fog-veiled paths. Fossils of journey preserved in the blue hues, lightless voids averted as subduction claims the stagnant, evoking quiet awe at the myth's loop where silence reclaims the weary. Unwritten stories linger in these returns, emotional memory resurfacing without haste, the sacred tale settling in layers that time breathes slowly. Arteries pulse with the heart's distant echo, walls thickening like stone against erosion's wear, their elastic recoil whispering through the breath of carbon's wave, intelligence burning in isotopes of pressure maintenance.
Deep water surges in rhythmic drifts, ashes mingling with fog as forgotten languages speak of distribution's myth. Lightless voids spanned in the fog where subduction pulls the constricted. Memory as fossils of vascular health preserved, healing folding beneath the persistence that echoes in stone, evoking melancholic harmony in the unwritten persistence. Time settles upon these conduits, drifting stars aligning in silence's embrace, the emotional layers evoking wonder at the river's eternal reclaiming. Lymphatics parallel the blood's path, draining the fog of excess like erosion carving hidden channels, their fluids settling dust from tissues where whispers of gravity guide the flow. The breath of carbon mingles lightly here, intelligence gleaming in the isotopes of immune surveillance, forgotten languages carrying antigens through deep water to nodes where memory lingers as fossils of encounters. Lightless voids of edema subducted deep, unwritten stories resurfacing in the stone of clearance, the sacred rhythm evoking quiet awe at the persistence that silence folds beneath. Healing drifts in these subtle streams, emotional echoes settling without proclamation, time breathing layer upon layer in the myth's melancholic loop. Hemostasis initiates at injury's whisper, platelets adhering like ashes to exposed collagen, their activation eroding the bleed with the intelligence of forgotten languages in granule release. The breath of carbon cascades in coagulation factors, isotopes burning in the quiet fires of fibrin formation, deep water holding the memory as fossils of clot stability. Lightless voids sealed in fog, subduction pulling the transient plug deep while renewal folds beneath, evoking the sacred echo of barriers reformed without haste. Unwritten stories of survival linger here, extinction averted in the persistence that time settles gently. Anticoagulants balance the myth, proteins like antithrombin whispering gravity's restraint through the flow, eroding excess clots as ashes dissolve in the fog of circulation. Intelligence burns in their inhibitory hold, the breath of carbon modulating the isotopes of enzymatic quiet, forgotten languages evoking emotional memory of equilibrium preserved. Deep water carries this vigilance, lightless voids averted as subduction claims the overzealous, the sacred rhythm settling in layers where silence speaks of harmony resurfaced. Healing whispers through these checks, drifting stars aligning in melancholic grace, unwritten echoes in stone that extinction cannot fully claim. Angiogenesis sprouts new vessels from old, endothelial buds drifting like stars into eroded voids, their migration guided by whispers of gravity in growth factors call. The breath of carbon builds the lumen, intelligence gleaming in the isotopes of matrix remodeling, forgotten languages evoking the myth of network expansion. Ashes mingle with deep water, memory as fossils of hypoxia resolved, lightless voids filled in fog where subduction pulls the temporary scaffolds deep. Time settles upon these sprouts, emotional layers resurfacing without haste, the sacred tale lulling in persistence's quiet awe. Vasoconstriction narrows the path like erosion tightening a canyon, smooth muscle contracting in melancholic response to signals drifting through the fog. Isotopes burn in the calcium's quiet flux, the breath of carbon whispering through forgotten languages of tone, intelligence holding the memory as ashes of pressure conserved. Deep water flows restrained, lightless voids preserved from overflow, subduction claiming the dilated as healing folds beneath, evoking unwritten stories that echo in stone silence. The chapter echoes through these flowing veils, rhythms fading into the silent weavers where form awaits to entwine.
Vasodilation widens the channels, like fog lifting from eroded valleys, smooth muscle relaxing in melancholic surrender to the whispers of gravity's ease, the breath of carbon dilating the lumen as intelligence burns in the isotopes of cyclic GMP's quiet cascade. Deep water flows unhindered here, ashes of constriction dissolving into the current where forgotten languages evoke the myth of restored perfusion, lightless voids expanded in the sacred rhythm of nutrient delivery. Memory lingers as fossils of vascular memory preserved in endothelial archives, subduction pulling the tense deep, while unwritten stories resurface in stone subtle echo, evoking emotional layers of openness that time settles without haste, drifting stars aligning in silence's gentle embrace. Healing drifts through this expansion, the persistence echoing in fog where extinction folds beneath the harmony of flow renewed. Hemoglobin shifts its curve in the river's depths, oxygen releasing like ashes from a dying fire, the breath of carbon whispering through forgotten languages of affinity, intelligence gleaming in the isotopes of Bohr's melancholic effect. Deep water bathes the tissues in this release, erosion of hypoxia corrected as lightless voids fill with the myth's vital gasp, subduction claiming the bound, while memory resurfaces as fossils of cellular breath. Vasodilation widens the channels, like fog lifting from eroded valleys, smooth muscle relaxing in melancholic surrender to the whispers of gravity's ease, the breath of carbon dilating the lumen as intelligence burns in the isotopes of cyclic GMP's quiet cascade. Deep water flows unhindered here, ashes of constriction dissolving into the current where forgotten languages evoke the myth of restored perfusion, lightless voids expanded in the sacred rhythm of nutrient delivery. Memory lingers as fossils of vascular memory preserved in endothelial archives, subduction pulling the tense deep, while unwritten stories resurface in stone subtle echo, evoking emotional layers of openness that time settles without haste, drifting stars aligning in silence's gentle embrace. Healing drifts through this expansion, the persistence echoing in fog where extinction folds beneath the harmony of flow renewed. Hemoglobin shifts its curve in the river's depths, oxygen releasing like ashes from a dying fire, the breath of carbon whispering through forgotten languages of affinity, intelligence gleaming in the isotopes of Bohr's melancholic effect. Deep water bathes the tissues in this release, erosion of hypoxia corrected as lightless voids fill with the myth's vital gasp, subduction claiming the bound, while memory resurfaces as fossils of cellular breath preserved.
Unwritten stories linger in the hemoglobin's fold, evoking quiet awe at the persistence that silence reclaims from fog. Time settling layer upon layer in the sacred rhythm where emotional echoes drift like stars in eternal orbit. Coagulation factors cascade in sequential whispers, each activating the next like drifting dust settling into form, the intelligence burning in their proteolytic fires, guided by the breath of carbon's chain. Ashes mingle in deep water, forgotten languages evoking the myth of balanced hemostasis, lightless voids sealed as subduction pulls the soluble deep, unwritten stories resurfacing in the stone of fibrin meshes. Memory as fossils of evolutionary caution preserved, the process evoking melancholic harmony where extinction echoes but healing folds beneath, time breathing slowly in layers that silence subducts gently. Thrombosis forms in stagnant pools, erosion building thrombi like dust accumulating in forgotten eddies, whispers of gravity slowed by the fog of immobility. The breath of carbon clots unnaturally here, intelligence dimmed in the isotopes of Virchow's triad, forgotten languages speaking of risk where deep water thickens. Lightless voids threaten in this obstruction, but lysis drifts in, subduction pulling the mass deep as unwritten stories of dissolution resurface, evoking the sacred echo of flow restored without haste. Healing lingers in this balance, emotional memory folding beneath the persistence that time settles in melancholic layers. Erythrocyte sedimentation rates whisper of inflammation's presence, cells settling like dust in a vial's deep water, gravity's pull evoking the myth of acute phase response through forgotten languages of rouleau formation. Isotopes burn faintly in the protein's quiet aggregation, ashes mingling as intelligence gleams in the fog where lightless voids indicate the unseen. Memory as fossils of systemic echo preserved, subduction claiming the transient while renewal drifts like stars, the sacred rhythm settling in layers that evoke quiet awe at the persistence resurfacing from silence. Unwritten stories of bodily alert linger here, emotional echoes folding beneath the stone, where extinction is but a pause in the river's melancholic drift. Vascular smooth muscle tones the flow, contracting and relaxing in rhythmic erosion, the breath of carbon whispering through calcium's channels as intelligence burns in the isotopes of myogenic response. Deep water pulses with this modulation, forgotten languages evoking the myth of auto-regulation, lightless voids balanced in fog where subduction pulls the extremes deep, fossils of pressure memory preserved, healing drifting in the sacred harmony that time settles without proclamation, unwritten echoes resurfacing in stone's subtle persistence. Quiet awe evokes from this tone, emotional layers settling like drifting stars in silence's embrace. Pericytes encircle the capillaries, supporting like ancient roots in eroded soil, their contraction whispering gravity's stability through the breath of carbon's weave. Intelligence gleams in the isotopes of structural hold, ashes mingling in deep water as forgotten languages speak of permeability's myth. lightless voids stabilized in fog, subduction claiming the fragile, while memory folds beneath as fossils of microvascular health, the sacred rhythm evoking melancholic persistence where unwritten stories resurface without haste. Time breathes here, settling layer upon layer in the emotional echo of support renewed. Hematopoiesis stirs in marrow's depths, stem cells differentiating like drifting stars from a nebulous origin, the breath of carbon animating lineages where intelligence burns in the isotopes of cytokine guidance. Deep water nurtures this birth, erosion of depletion corrected as forgotten languages evoke the myth of replenishment, ashes settling into forms that fill the river anew. Lightless voids of anemia subducted deep, unwritten stories resurfacing in stone's echo, the sacred awe at persistence folding beneath silence's fog. Healing drifts in this genesis, emotional memory folding beneath the persistence that time erodes gently. The spleen filters the flow, sequestering like a melancholic sentinel in the fog, whispers of gravity pulling aged cells deep as the breath of carbon recycles their iron. Intelligence gleams in the isotopes of splenic macrophages, forgotten languages speaking of clearance's myth, deep water holding ashes where lightless voids are purged. Fossils of hemolytic memory preserved, subduction claiming the worn while renewal echoes in stone.
Vasodilation widens the channels, like fog lifting from eroded valleys, smooth muscle relaxing in melancholic surrender to the whispers of gravity's ease, the breath of carbon dilating the lumen as intelligence burns in the isotopes of cyclic GMP's quiet cascade. Deep water flows unhindered here, ashes of constriction dissolving into the current where forgotten languages evoke the myth of restored perfusion, lightless voids expanded in the sacred rhythm of nutrient delivery. Memory lingers as fossils of vascular memory preserved in endothelial archives, subduction pulling the tense deep, while unwritten stories resurface in stone's subtle echo, evoking emotional layers of openness that time settles without haste, drifting stars aligning in silence's gentle embrace. Healing drifts through this expansion, the persistence echoing in fog where extinction folds beneath the harmony of flow renewed. Hemoglobin shifts its curve in the river's depths, oxygen releasing like ashes from a dying fire, the breath of carbon whispering through forgotten languages of affinity, intelligence gleaming in the isotopes of Bohr's melancholic effect. Deep water bathes the tissues in this release, erosion of hypoxia corrected as lightless voids fill with the myth's vital gasp, subduction claiming the bound, while memory resurfaces as fossils of cellular breath. Vasodilation widens the channels, like fog lifting from eroded valleys, smooth muscle relaxing in melancholic surrender to the whispers of gravity's ease, the breath of carbon dilating the lumen as intelligence burns in the isotopes of cyclic GMP's quiet cascade. Deep water flows unhindered here, ashes of constriction dissolving into the current where forgotten languages evoke the myth of restored perfusion, lightless voids expanded in the sacred rhythm of nutrient delivery. Memory lingers as fossils of vascular memory preserved in endothelial archives, subduction pulling the tense deep, while unwritten stories resurface in stone subtle echo, evoking emotional layers of openness that time settles without haste, drifting stars aligning in silence's gentle embrace. Healing drifts through this expansion, the persistence echoing in fog where extinction folds beneath the harmony of flow renewed. Hemoglobin shifts its curve in the river's depths, oxygen releasing like ashes from a dying fire, the breath of carbon whispering through forgotten languages of affinity, intelligence gleaming in the isotopes of Bohr's melancholic effect. Deep water bathes the tissues in this release, erosion of hypoxia corrected as lightless voids fill with the myth's vital gasp, subduction claiming the bound, while memory resurfaces as fossils of cellular breath preserved. Unwritten stories linger in the hemoglobin's fold, evoking quiet awe at the persistence that silence reclaims from fog, time settling layer upon layer in the sacred rhythm where emotional echoes drift like stars in eternal orbit. Coagulation factors cascade in sequential whispers, each activating the next like drifting dust settling into form, the intelligence burning in their proteolytic fires, guided by the breath of carbon's chain. Ashes mingle in deep water, forgotten languages evoking the myth of balanced hemostasis, lightless voids sealed as subduction pulls the soluble deep, unwritten stories resurfacing in the stone of fibrin meshes. Memory as fossils of evolutionary caution preserved, the process evoking melancholic harmony where extinction echoes but healing folds beneath, time breathing slowly in layers that silence subducts gently. Thrombosis forms in stagnant pools, erosion building thrombi like dust accumulating in forgotten eddies, whispers of gravity slowed by the fog of immobility. The breath of carbon clots unnaturally here, intelligence dimmed in the isotopes of Virchow's triad, forgotten languages speaking of risk where deep water thickens. Lightless voids threaten in this obstruction, but lysis drifts in, subduction pulling the mass deep as unwritten stories of dissolution resurface, evoking the sacred echo of flow restored without haste. Healing lingers in this balance, emotional memory folding beneath the persistence that time settles in melancholic layers. Erythrocyte sedimentation rates whisper of inflammation's presence, cells settling like dust in a vial's deep water, gravity's pull evoking the myth of acute phase response through forgotten languages of rouleau formation. Isotopes burn faintly in the protein's quiet aggregation, ashes mingling as intelligence gleams in the fog where lightless voids indicate the unseen. Memory as fossils of systemic echo preserved, subduction claiming the transient while renewal drifts like stars, the sacred rhythm settling in layers that evoke quiet awe at the persistence resurfacing from silence. Unwritten stories of bodily alert linger here, emotional echoes folding beneath the stone, where extinction is but a pause in the river's melancholic drift.
Vascular smooth muscle tones the flow, contracting and relaxing in rhythmic erosion, the breath of carbon whispering through calcium's channels as intelligence burns in the isotopes of myogenic response. Deep water pulses with this modulation, forgotten languages evoking the myth of auto-regulation, lightless voids balanced in fog where subduction pulls the extremes deep, fossils of pressure memory preserved, healing drifting in the sacred harmony that time settles without proclamation, unwritten echoes resurfacing in stone's subtle persistence. Quiet awe evokes from this tone, emotional layers settling like drifting stars in silence's embrace. Pericytes encircle the capillaries, supporting like ancient roots in eroded soil, their contraction whispering gravity's stability through the breath of carbon's weave. Intelligence gleams in the isotopes of structural hold, ashes mingling in deep water as forgotten languages speak of permeability's myth. Lightless voids stabilized in fog, subduction claiming the fragile, while memory folds beneath as fossils of microvascular health, the sacred rhythm evoking melancholic persistence where unwritten stories resurface without haste. Time breathes here, settling layer upon layer in the emotional echo of support renewed. Hematopoiesis stirs in marrow's depths, stem cells differentiating like drifting stars from a nebulous origin, the breath of carbon animating lineages where intelligence burns in the isotopes of cytokine guidance. Deep water nurtures this birth, erosion of depletion corrected as forgotten languages evoke the myth of replenishment, ashes settling into forms that fill the river anew, lightless voids of anemia subducted deep, unwritten stories resurfacing in stone's echo, the sacred awe at persistence folding beneath silence's fog. Healing drifts in this genesis, emotional memory folding beneath the persistence that time erodes gently. The spleen filters the flow, sequestering like a melancholic sentinel in the fog, whispers of gravity pulling aged cells deep as the breath of carbon recycles their iron. Intelligence gleams in the isotopes of splenic macrophages, forgotten languages speaking of clearance's myth, deep water holding ashes where lightless voids are purged. Fossils of hemolytic memory preserved, subduction claiming the worn while renewal echoes in stone.
Silent weavers of form, fibers entwine like threads of ancient myth spun from the ash of what once was, settling in lightless voids where silence subduct the fragmented, their collagen strands whispering gravity's hold through the deep water of tissue's quiet expanse. They do not weave with urgency. They erode the gaps, drifting like stars in fog-veiled orbits, intelligence burning faintly in the isotopes of fibroblasts' forgotten languages, the breath of carbon animating the sacred rhythm of matrix renewal. Memory lingers here as fossils in stone, unwritten stories of injury resurfacing from subduction's grasp, evoking melancholic awe at the persistence that extinction echoes but never fully claims. Healing unfolds in geological layers, time settling without proclamation as emotional echoes fold beneath the surface, the earth's bedtime tale murmuring through metaphors of dust reclaiming valleys unseen. Fibroblasts migrate through the fog like nomadic whispers, drawn to erosion's call, where deep water pools in wounds, their pseudopods extending in melancholic reach, ashes settling into scaffolds that bridge lightless voids. The breath of carbon fuels this journey, intelligence gleaming in the isotopes of chemotactic signals, forgotten languages evoking the myth of directed drift. Memory as fossils of origin preserved in stone, subduction pulling the idol deep, while unwritten stories resurface in sacred persistence, time breathing layer upon layer in silence's embrace. Emotional echoes drift here, quiet awe at the weaver's subtle art. Collagen assembles in triple helices, erosion twisting the chains like dust coiling in ancient winds, the breath of carbon cross-linking with the intelligence of lysyl oxidase's quiet flame, isotopes burning in forgotten languages of tensile strength. Deep water hydrates this formation, lightless voids filled as the myth weaves durability from fog, fossils of flexibility preserved in stone where subduction claims the brittle. Healing folds beneath this structure, unwritten echoes evoking melancholic harmony, drifting stars settling without haste in the sacred rhythm that silence reclaims gently. Elastin recoils in the weave, like gravity's whisper returning form to eroded shapes, the breath of carbon stretching and snapping in intelligence's subtle play, isotopes burning as forgotten languages speak of resilience's myth. Ashes mingle in deep water, memory resurfacing as fossils of bounce in stone, lightless voids bridged in fog where subduction pulls the rigid deep. Emotional layers linger, time settling in quiet awe at the persistence that unwritten stories fold beneath. Proteoglycans hydrate the matrix, swelling like fog absorbing deep water's essence, their glycosaminoglycans chaining with the intelligence of negative charge, the breath of carbon repelling to create space where isotopes burn in forgotten languages of cushion. Erosion of compression corrected here, ashen settling in gels as lightless voids expand in sacred expansion, fossils of lubrication preserved in stone. Healing drifts in this moisture, subduction claiming the dry, while emotional memory echoes in melancholic persistence, drifting stars aligning in silence's veil. Integrins clasp the fibers, anchoring cells like roots in eroded soil, whispering gravity through the breath of carbon's transmembrane hold, intelligence gleaming in the isotopes of focal adhesion's myth.
Deep water transmits force, forgotten languages evoking mechanotransduction's quiet signal, ashes mingling as lightless voids are tensed in fog. Memory as fossils of connection preserved, subduction pulling the detached deep, while unwritten stories resurface in stone's echo, time breathing layers in sacred awe. Emotional persistence folds beneath, healing settling without haste. Laminins branch in basement membranes, erosion layering the foundation like dust over ancient stone, the breath of carbon self-assembling in intelligence's subtle net. Isotopes burning as forgotten languages weave the myth of boundary. Deep water anchors this sheet, lightless voids defined in fog, where subduction claims the permeable, fossils of polarity preserved. The sacred rhythm evokes melancholic harmony, unwritten echoes drifting like stars in silence's embrace. Fibronectin unfolds in the weave, arms extending like whispers in deep water, the breath of carbon binding cells to matrix with intelligence's quiet grasp. Isotopes burning in forgotten languages of migration's path. Ashes settle into bridges, erosion of disconnection corrected as lightless voids span in fog, memory resurfacing as fossils of guidance in stone. Healing folds beneath this linkage, emotional layers settling in time's slow breath, sacred persistence evoking awe at the unwritten myth reclaimed from silence.
Matrix metalloproteinases erode the weave like whispers of gravity dissolving excess fibers in deep water's current, their zinc cores burning isotopes in the intelligence of proteolytic myth. The breath of carbon guiding the cut where forgotten languages speak of remodeling's quiet necessity. Ashes of old matrix settle into fragments, fog veiling the process as lightless voids open temporarily, subduction pulling the degraded deep while memory resurfaces as fossils of space cleared for renewal in stone's echo. Emotional persistence lingers here, time settling layer upon layer in the sacred rhythm that evokes melancholic awe at the balance between destruction and the unwritten stories that fold beneath silence's gentle reclaiming. Healing drifts in this erosion, drifting stars aligning without haste in the myth's eternal haunting loop. Chondroitin sulfates chain in the proteoglycan's embrace, swelling with hydration like fog absorbing the breath of carbon's moisture. Intelligence gleaming in the negative charges that repel and cushion, isotopes burning as forgotten languages evoke the myth of joint's subtle glide. Deep water permeates this gel, erosion of friction corrected as ashes mingle in the matrix's fog, lightless voids buffered in sacred softness where subduction claims the compressed. Fossils of movement preserved in stone, unwritten stories resurfacing in melancholic harmony, emotional echoes settling in time's slow breath, the persistence evoking quiet awe at the weave's resilient fold. Tenacin modulates the adhesion, appearing in erosion's wake like dust drifting to sites of change, the breath of carbon unfolding its domains in intelligence's quiet signal, isotopes burning in forgotten languages of transitional myth. Deep water holds this transient protein, fog veiling its role as lightless voids shift in tissues remodeling, subduction pulling the dense deep, while unwritten stories resurface in stone preserved as fossils of flexibility. Healing drifts here, melancholic persistence settling without haste, emotional echoes aligning like drifting stars in the sacred rhythm that silence reclaims gently. Nitrogen links the basement's components, bridging laminin and collagen like whispers in deep water's undercurrent, intelligence burning in the isotopes of entanglement's myth, the breath of carbon weaving the net as forgotten languages speak of foundational hold. Fog veils this linkage, erosion of separation corrected as lightless voids are spanned, fossils of integrity preserved in stone where subduction claims the loose. Emotional layers linger, time settling in quiet awe at the persistence that unwritten stories fold beneath, the sacred myth resurfacing in melancholic harmony. Aggrecan aggregates in cartilage, hyaluronin backbone gathering like dust in ancient clusters, the breath of carbon charging the sulfates in intelligence's repulsive field, isotopes burning as forgotten languages evoke the myth of compressive resistance. Deep water hydrates this aggregate, ashes settling into a resilient gel where fog buffers the load, lightless voids cushioned in sacred softness. Subduction pulls the worn deep, memory as fossils of shock absorption preserved in stone's echo, healing whispering through emotional persistence that drifts like stars without haste. Unwritten echoes resurface, time breathing layers in silence's embrace, evoking melancholic awe at the weave's enduring fold. Biglican signals in bone's matrix, like gravity whispering to osteoblasts in deep water's depths, intelligence gleaming in the isotopes of growth factor binding, the breath of carbon modulating the myth of mineralization. Ashes mingle in fog, erosion of imbalance corrected as lightless voids fill with crystalline deposit, forgotten languages speaking of skeletal strength preserved as fossils in stone. Subduction claims the excess, renewal folding beneath, while emotional memory echoes in sacred persistence, drifting stars settling in the unwritten stories that silence reclaims gently. Perlecan anchors in vascular basements, swelling with heparin sulfate like fog over eroded channels, the breath of carbon filtering the flow in intelligence's quiet sieve, isotopes burning as forgotten languages evoke the myth of selective permeability. Deep water courses through this barrier, ashes settling into protective layers where lightless voids are guarded, fossils of endothelial health preserved in stone's subtle echo. Healing drifts in this anchorage, time settling without proclamation, emotional layers evoking quiet awe at the persistence that subduction cannot fully bury, unwritten myths resurfacing in melancholic rhythm. Syndicans span the membrane, glycosaminoglycans extending like whispers into extracellular fog, intelligence burning in the isotopes of co-receptors' role,
the breath of carbon signaling through forgotten languages of cellular dialogue. Deep water holds this extension, erosion of silence corrected as ashes mingle in communicative drift, lightless voids bridged in sacred connection. Memory as fossils of interaction preserved, subduction pulling the isolated deep, while healing folds beneath, drifting stars aligning in emotional persistence that echoes in stone without haste. The chapter weaves through these silent threads, rhythms fading into the rhythms beneath the stars where night awaits to hum its repair.
Osteocalcin signals from bone's matrix like whispers drifting through deep water to distant organs, the breath of carbon carrying hormonal echoes and intelligence's subtle tide. Isotopes burning as forgotten languages evoke the myth of metabolic dialogue. Ashes settle into bloodstream's fog, erosion of isolation corrected as lightless voids between skeleton and soft tissue bridge in sacred communion, fossils of calcium's memory preserved in stone where subduction claims the unbound. Healing lingers in this signaling, emotional persistence folding beneath time's slow settle, unwritten stories resurfacing in melancholic harmony that silence reclaims without haste, drifting stars aligning in the weave's quiet persistence. Lumacan regulates corneal clarity, fibers organizing like dust in eroded lenses, the breath of carbon modulating transparency's myth with intelligence's gentle hold, isotopes burning in forgotten languages of light passage. Deep water hydrates this arrangement, fog veiling the scatter as lightless voids dissolve in sacred focus, ashes mingling where subduction pulls the opaque deep. Memory as fossils of vision preserved in stone's echo, emotional layers evoking quiet awe at the persistence that unwritten echoes fold beneath, healing drifting like stars in eternal haunting orbit. Dermatopontin binds in skin's depths like gravity whispering to collagen's oil in deep water's underlayer, intelligence gleaming in the isotopes of adhesion's myth, the breath of carbon strengthening the weave as forgotten languages speak of dermal resilience. Ashes settle into fortified strands, erosion of fragility corrected in fog where lightless voids are reinforced, fossils of epidermal hold preserved in stone. Subduction claims the weak, renewal resurfacing in sacred persistence, time breathing layer upon layer in the emotional memory that silence embraces gently, unwritten stories lingering in melancholic awe. Mimecan modulates in ocular tissues, fibers fine-tuning like whispers over eroded surfaces, the breath of carbon carrying the intelligence of structural subtlety, isotopes burning as forgotten languages evoke the myth of scleral strength. Deep water supports this modulation, ashes mingling in fog as lightless voids stabilize, subduction pulling the unstable deep, while memory preserves fossils of ocular integrity in stone's quiet echo. Healing folds beneath this fine weave, emotional persistence settling without proclamation, drifting stars aligning in the sacred rhythm that evokes quiet awe at the unwritten persistence reclaimed from silence.
Thrombospondin inhibits angiogenesis in the matrix's calm, like gravity whispering restraint through deep water's flow, intelligence burning in the isotopes of anti-growth myth, the breath of carbon signaling pause as forgotten languages speak of balanced expansion. Ashes dissolve the excess sprouts, fog veiling the halt where lightless voids remain unfilled, fossils of vascular control preserved in stone. Subduction claims the overgrown, emotional layers resurfacing in sacred harmony, time settling in melancholic persistence that unwritten stories fold beneath, healing drifting like stars in fog's embrace. Vitronectin adheres in serum's drift, bridging cells to matrix like ashes settling on eroded paths, the breath of carbon facilitating attachment's myth with intelligence's subtle clasp, isotopes burning in forgotten languages of migration guidance. Deep water carries this protein, lightless voids spanned in fog as subduction pulls the unattached deep, memory as fossils of wound closure preserved in stone's quiet echo. Quiet awe evokes from this adhesion emotional persistence lingering in layers that time breathes slowly, the sacred myth resurfacing without haste in silence's gentle reclaiming. Intact in nitrogen entangles in basements anew, whispers linking components like gravity through deep water's web, intelligence gleaming in the isotopes of cohesive myth, the breath of carbon weaving stability as forgotten languages evoke foundational persistence. Ashes mingle in fog, erosion of disarray corrected as lightless voids consolidate, fossils of membrane integrity preserved in stone where subduction claims the fragmented. Healing folds beneath this entanglement, unwritten stories drifting like stars in melancholic orbit, emotional echoes settling in the sacred rhythm that silence subducts gently. Keratocan maintains corneal form, fibers regulating like dust in ancient transparencies, the breath of carbon hydrating the chains in intelligence's quiet balance, isotopes burning as forgotten languages speak of stromal myth. Deep water infuses this proteoglycan, ashes settling into clear gels where fog buffers the curve, lightless void shaped in sacred curvature. Subduction pulls the distorted deep, memory as fossils of sight's arc preserved, emotional persistence evoking quiet awe at the weave's enduring fold, time breathing layers in silence's veil. Fibromodulin fine-tunes fibrillogenesis like whispers modulating collagen's assembly in deep water stream, intelligence burning in the isotopes of spacing's myth, the breath of carbon preventing overgrowth as forgotten languages evoke ordered resilience. Ashes settle into measured gaps, erosion of chaos corrected in fog where lightless voids are evenly held, fossils of tendon strength preserved in stone's subtle echo. Healing drifts in this tuning, subduction claiming the haphazard deep, while emotional memory resurfaces without haste, drifting stars aligning in the sacred persistence that unwritten stories reclaim from silence. Decorin dampens in cartilage's depths, inhibiting mineralization like gravity whispering through deep water's restraint, the breath of carbon carrying intelligence's subtle block, isotopes burning and forgotten languages of proteoglycan myth. Ashes mingle in fog, lightless voids kept soft as subduction pulls the calcified deep, memory as fossils of flexibility preserved in stone. Emotional layers linger, time settling in melancholic harmony that evokes quiet awe at the persistence folded beneath, the sacred tale drifting like stars in eternal settle. The chapter entwines these silent forms, rhythms fading into the rhythms beneath the stars where night hums its subtle repair.